Okay, so what happens when they eat the fruit? Well, they don't die. They just don't really live anymore, right? Not like they used to. And they do gain kind of autonomous knowledge. And Burge doesn't really put it this way, but I'll argue that it's a corrupted knowledge, right? It's not. They're not really seeing things clearly anymore. They know good and evil, but their judgment of what's good and evil is wrong. It's off, right? Now, when they trusted God and they had an intimate relationship with God about what was good and evil, their judgment and their vision was much clearer. Okay? So now they're naked and now they're ashamed, right? It's a little bit different. What's once seen as good is now seen as bad. Again, it's not that Adam and Eve's condition of their nakedness changed, right? They're still open, but now they're somehow ashamed of that, right? They're somehow afraid to be open. They want to cover things up. They want to hide a little, right? They're not sharing intimately with each other and God anymore, right? So we can see this as a sign of kind of alienation, a self-alienation from the community, right? They hide from God, and when God comes down in the breezy part of the day, suggesting that he did this every day, right? They hide. And when God says, why are you hiding? And they say, it's because they're naked. And he's like, what? Who told you that? And Eve, immediately blames the snake, as Adam blames Eve. And Adam even blames God. He's like, the woman, the one you put here, she gave me the fruit. So you can see that they don't have this intimacy, trust, and loving relationship here. It's getting to be a relationship of alienation, fear, distrust, wanting to hide things from each other. Again, this is kind of the J writer seeing, like, this is where we're at. Like, this is the world we're kind of living in. But it's not who we originally are. It's not really our essence. In other words, things could be different. Okay, so if we move on to the punishments, we again have to read these canonically. And we already talked about this with Abel a little bit. Punishment of God, we can't really take it as something as God getting angry and lashing out at someone. But we could probably understand it more like consequences that God allows us to suffer so that we can learn to be more like him, right? So that we can learn to find that union with him through learning to love like God. And at a basic level, these punishments function as an etiology. God curses the snake and says he's going to have to crawl around on his belly. So it tells us why snakes don't have legs, right? It tells us why women are dominated by men, right? In Eden, woman was not dominated by men. In Eden, Eve spoke freely to the serpent. Maybe that wasn't true in 9th century BC Israel, right? Also tells you why women have pain in childbirth. These are just answering questions like, why is it like this? Why is it like that, right? It tells you why men have to work so hard to farm the land. Now remember, when these stories were originally getting written down around 1000, this was also when a lot of Israelites were kind of converting from a herding lifestyle to a farming lifestyle and kind of settling down around the newly formed Israelite cities, especially Jerusalem. And there was like a tough period there for a lot of people and say, geez, I've been doing this. Like, how do we do this, right? How do we do this farming thing, right? So especially in the South, most Israelites were probably not used to farming. And also you had pretty arid areas. So even for people who were experts, it took a lot of work, right? The ground's not that easy to cultivate. And then also, just a basic question, why do we die? Why do people die? That's a basic human question. And this gives an answer. This story gives an answer to it. Again, there's certain warnings for the people from J. And one is that sin has consequences, right? You see here, when you go against, or in this case, let's say when you stop trusting God, when you kind of try to go your own way, things can get bad, right? So you have to, you're wise to incorporate God in your decisions, right? And then for them, a practical way that this was applied was, not listening to foreign cults. again, a lot of these foreign cults had or worshipped snakes. It was a primary symbol of a lot of the Canaanite religions. So again, like, hey, don't listen to the snake for them meant don't join these foreign cults. Don't listen to their priests and priestesses, right? You see that in the perpetual hostility with the offspring with Eve, right? They say, so it's like never, right? It's like these cults are always bad. These cults are always going to lead you into trouble. For the kings of Israel, this was a special warning too, because the kings would marry princesses from other tribes, non-Israelite tribes, in order to make treaties with them. And when they came, they always brought their gods, including their snake gods. And it was kind of a sign like, okay, like these, your foreign wife's going to do this stuff, but remember that, God, Yahweh, has to be on top of that. You can't listen to that stuff, right? You have to let it be known that Yahweh is God in Israel. So now they are going to be expelled from the Garden of Eden, and Adam is going to give Eve a new name. Notice he's already taking over a kind of a dominant role now. Before he named her Isha, out of Ish, from Ish, and it kind of was a sign of their equality or unity, right? Their equal dignity. Now he's going to name her Ava, Eve, right? Woman alive. And there's kind of a different life now, a different name for different life. They've died an emotional and spiritual death in a lot of ways. And now they've got this new life that is not as good as their old life, right? It's kind of like the opposite of the religious message. And we can see, in Christianity, we talk about our new life, and we're kind of going back to paradise, so to speak, right? Now, God is not abandoning them, right? That's one of the things that probably they thought was going to happen now, and oh my gosh, God's going to reject us. God's there with them, right? He still cares for them, and he shows this by giving them clothes. So the way that Burge talks about it is that they're expelled to a life where their relationship with God and one another will continue to be affected by their failure to trust God and their grab for knowledge that God alone has the maturity to wield, right? Interesting way to talk about it. This is a very interesting creation myth, and people do take it in various levels. Like a lot of people would be like, this just says obey God. They'll take it a very you have a command, you have to follow it, and some people even take it to a point where it's like anti-intellectual, right, where they use it to suppress reason or something. Then they'll use it as a validation for blind faith. It doesn't seem in keeping with the whole of the Israelite tradition or scriptures. But there's definitely something here with the acknowledgement that trying to understand things without God's help or a divine vision won't really work out, right? Just the idea, so to speak, that you could know what's good and bad, right? That kind of know good and evil for yourself, that doesn't really work, right? Like you might know what you think is good for you now or good for your family now, but we can't really tell what's good in the end, can we? Right? We can tell what we want, but do we know what's really good for us? Do we know how things are going to work out in the end? I mean, haven't you ever had something happen to you in your life and you thought this is the worst thing for me, but then it turned out to actually be good for you in the end? So the idea that as humans we could see the long game, see the future, and understand how everything's going to work out, it's not really true, is it? In that way, the knowledge of good and evil is kind of a lie from the beginning. So at the end here, God places the cherubim, these 6 winged mythical creatures that were believed in all over the ancient Near East. They're in everybody's mythologies. And he puts them in the entrance, in front of the entrance to the Garden of Eden, with the flaming sword. And the flaming sword, Bird says, represents lightning, which was understood as an expression of God's anger, or God's disapproval of something, that he might strike it with lightning. Now, just a little reflection. I've already hinted at a little, but I want to go into it more. And again, this I can understand that this is not quite maybe to the level of historical critical analysis of the text. It's going a little bit with a spiritual analysis, because I can't claim that, hey, this is how this is the original intention of the authors. I'm not claiming the priestly writers were saying, we're taking it to the extent that I'm going to take it now, with trusting God and the knowledge of good and evil. But you do see the idea that they're definitely saying, there's something with the human sin that has to do with not trusting in God. That's kind of in some ways what turns our life from paradise into a very rough and hostile and alienated life. Okay, so my question is, could the knowledge of good and evil be a kind of ignorance? That is, that it's a facade from the beginning. Again, like I said already, could it be that human beings don't actually have the capacity to know good and evil in the long run, right? In other words, could it mean judging things for ourselves? Kind of like what Burge was saying about not trusting the goodness of God, right? Could the knowledge of evil, right, represent thinking that some of the things that God gives us are evil, right? Now, in the Garden of Eden, didn't it seem like everything was good, right? In the first creation account, which is written later by the priestly source, didn't they interpret it that way? Didn't they say, based on their Israelite tradition, of which the second creation account was a big part of? Didn't they also think God created everything good? That certainly seems to the picture. So where was the evil, right? The knowledge of good and evil, where was that, right? Well, then the idea that something that God created could be evil, maybe that's the sin in itself, right? So you see Adam and Eve are naked and unashamed, and then all of a sudden, after they've eaten from the fruit of the knowledge from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they are naked and ashamed, right? Them being naked didn't change. What happened? The way that they saw being naked changed, right? They started to think being naked is wrong, right? Maybe it's because they thought, hey, being different is wrong, right? They took the things that God gave them, they took the gifts that God had provided them, and they started to judge them. And instead of judging them all as good as they had before, they just kind of had this intuitive trust in God. Now they're starting to doubt that, and they're thinking, oh, maybe God gives us evil things. Okay, so perhaps original sin is thinking and judging without remembering how much God loves us, without remembering that God has this intimate and loving relationship with us. Right? If you look at the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, or the realization of saints like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, you'll see that in a certain way, perhaps maybe they had re-entered Eden, right? Because they saw the world a lot like Adam and Eve in paradise. Everything had a purpose. Everything was a gift of God somehow.